Yeah. Okay. I think this particular element of Habitat, being at Chrisp Street and doing something for the Being Human Festival, was a really different way we approached sort of an event. Instead of sort of culminating outputs from a project and putting it on in a sort of traditional exhibitionary or space that we would show, we really concentrated on the place that we were focused on, being very local radius of Chrisp Street. And it was very experimental for us. It was very raw and open format. We didn't know what exactly to expect on the day. We didn't send out invites to our sort of traditional networks or publicize it in any real way. We basically got out there and just flyed a few shops and businesses in the local community. And so there was a risk that maybe no one would turn up or come through our doors. Being in a sort of disused shoe shop in around Chrisp Street was also another risk. The university made it very clear the sort of health and safety risks involved, the public liability. Yes, it was a little bit dilapidated, and yeah, we've started to feel really nervous about it, to the point that actually we were thinking about pulling the plug, but we kind of pushed on, transformed the space into what we felt would be somewhat interesting to the people coming in off the street. And when we opened the doors, we were really, really surprised with how much engagement we got from the local residents. And I think through that sort of experimental approach, we got engagement and interactions and encounters from a range of people we would never have met in our traditional sort of spaces in which we communicate.
So you spoke a little bit there about us being open to being a little bit more vulnerable, maybe, and acting in a way that actually we couldn't predict. But how do you think it was for the people who came through the doors, who came and spent some time with us? Do you feel that they would feel that kind of sense of risk and vulnerability, and what might they be feeling, or from what you saw through that event and how we worked?
I think actually, I'm not sure if they sensed any vulnerability from us. I actually felt as though it seemed to them that we had created a safe space for them to talk with us. Actually, it felt like everyone who came through was really interested to see the sort of unexpected stuff that was happening in what used to be a very commercially driven space. And I think the way in which we had shown our work and sort of talked with people allowed them to really ask us questions and to also tell us about their concerns and what their ideas around their local place was. And I think that's something I was really pleasantly surprised about. Really didn't know how people would engage with the work that we put on, and to see the sort of level of interest and really open and honest communication, that was really, really great experience.
Right.
So I've got two questions for you now. We had a lot of encounters or interactions throughout that day at Chrisp Street, but maybe can you tell us about one moment in particular that was meaningful to you?
Okay. Thanks, Renee. As you said, we got to speak to people that we wouldn't normally be able to speak to. We wanted to speak to people in a particular area about nature, about that sense of place in relation to their habitats, and also whether their habits of attire had anything to do with that. So it's quite difficult to go up to a stranger and say, does what you wear actually represent what you stand up for? But through having this event here, one particular guy, Steve, came in. I think, first of all, he was curious because we got Being Human in Chrisp Street on the outside walls, and we'd also got these images of what nature looks like in action inside. So nature making things, conceiving things, wearing things, caring for things, and that sense of having something that was familiar. And then actually, for me to think as a fashion designer that I could hold something up that would also be familiar, a T-shirt, but that represented very specifically that space, because it was the images were about biodiversity in Chrisp Street, meant that I could start to have a conversation on a very kind of open level, as you said, something that was actually quite authentic. It didn't feel prescribed. And for us, I think this notion of being able to do something that was a spectacle of fashion in this city is very much around commerce. It's very shiny, it's very slick. And doing something that really actually was a spectacle, it was quite public, but at the same time it's actually really personal, was something that made my idea of what it is to be a designer and what this idea of fashion as participation rather than consumption actually might be, and how we could represent that in so many different ways.
You've got 1 minute.
Got 1 minute.
One more question, so that's perfect. So what was the intention of creating this opportunity for such exchange?
I think there's a lot of noise around fashion sustainability, around this notion of what that is, and in relation to environmental and social sustainability. But a lot of it is about material reduction. A lot of it is about this notion of being lean, cutting back, less of stuff. And I think we really were intending to look at this notion of actually more interaction, more engagement, more sense of what fashion is, both in its making but also in its wearing, in this kind of notion of representing people, and obviously very specifically political. You stand up and wear something that represents you. Can you actually talk about that? And can you find a way in which fashion can represent you and represent your voice very differently? So, yeah, we wanted to represent this city as being something that isn't about just fashion as consumption. We wanted to be fashion as something that is a means for voice. I think in a small way, a very small way, we manage that. And I hope it means that we can try to find other ways to be able to do that too.
Great. Round of applause, please.
A lot more to say, but...